Okay, so think about it. Like how much we all use software every day, right? It's on our phones, in our cars, heck, even running our smart fridges these days.
It's true. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and imagine, like, what if I told you that a lot of that software, it relies on something called open source software?
OSS.
Yeah, OSS. You probably never even heard of it, right? But it's basically free code. Anyone can use it, change it, share it, the whole thing. And that's actually what we're going to be diving deep into today. It's all about the hidden value of this whole open source world.
That's right. We kind of take for granted this incredible amount of free software. I mean, it
Yeah.
powers so much of our digital lives. And today we're going to explore just how valuable that free software really is, both in terms of like its creation cost and then also its impact on businesses around the world.
All right, so for this deep dive, we've got two main sources to guide us. First up, we've got the Census 2, a free and open source software. Now, you can think of this as like a behind the scenes look at the open source building blocks, like the stuff that companies use to actually create the software that we buy.
And then on top of that, we're also going to be looking at this built with data set. Now, this thing, it analyzes millions of websites. It tries to see what open source software they rely on for all their like outward facing operations.
All right, so get this, the numbers, we're talking about serious numbers here. We're talking trillions, trillions of dollars in value. It's going to be pretty wild to see how this all plays out. So first, okay, imagine, just imagine, open source software vanishes. Poof, gone.
What do you think it would even cost to just rewrite all that code, like completely from scratch?
Well, I mean, that's where this concept of labor replacement value comes in, right? It's essentially asking, like, what if we had to hire like a bunch of developers to just recreate all of this open source software, right? Like, what would the final bill even look like? And according to the Census SESIC research, that bill could be anywhere between like 1.22 billion and 6.22 billion dollars.
And keep in mind that's just for a one-time rewrite of the like the most used open source software. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's actually more the a focused estimate compared to some like earlier studies, right? Those tried to like put a value on all open source software,
Mm.
and they came up with much higher numbers, but they weren't as specific to what businesses are actually using on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So it's like a more realistic picture.
Right.
Okay, so now let's flip the script a bit. Let's look at things from the demand side. What if every single company that uses open source software, like all of them, what if they had to pay to have it rewritten in-house? Like imagine that. That's when things get really crazy.
Yeah, we're talking potential costs of anywhere from 2.59 trillion to 13.18 trillion dollars
Whoa.
globally. I
Right.
mean, it's a massive figure, right?
Right.
It just like highlights how much open source software like underpins like the whole global economy.
Trillions. To put that in perspective, okay, global software revenue in 2020 was only $531.7 billion dollars.
Right.
And when you start considering things like software depreciation and all that national accounting data, like it's estimated that companies spent something like $3.4 trillion dollars on software that year.
Yeah, but if you take open source out of the equation,
Yeah.
like completely out, that number, it could jump to $12.2 trillion.
Right.
That's like 3.5 times higher.
So it's safe to say, it's more than safe to say, open source software, it isn't just saving companies a few bucks, it's creating some massive cost savings on a global scale. I mean, which means like huge productivity gains. It's like
Yeah.
this invisible economic engine just humming along.
It really is. It really is. And you know what's even more interesting? Not all open source software is created equal. Like when we start to dig into the different programming languages,
Okay.
we see these really intriguing variations in value.
So there's more to this than just free code. This is where it gets really interesting for me. So tell me more about the programming language side of things.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. There's this concept called heterogeneity, which, basically means that things aren't all uniform. We looked at 6 of the like most popular programming languages: C, Java, JavaScript, Python, TypeScript, and Go. And, when we analyze both the supply side and demand side value for each one of these, some interesting like patterns emerge.
What kind of patterns are we talking about? Anything like really surprising to you?
One of the most striking findings was the value associated with Go. Like it has both a high supply side value,
Yep.
right? Meaning it'd be really expensive to recreate. And then it also has this absolutely enormous demand side value, which just reflects like its wide use in companies.
Now I'm curious, what makes Go so valuable compared to these other languages?
Well, it probably comes down to like Go's popularity in cloud computing and all that infrastructure development.
Yeah.
It's known for being efficient and scalable,
Right.
right? which are super crucial in those areas. Like think about companies like Google and Netflix. They rely super heavily on Go for like their huge infrastructure needs.
Yeah.
So the more companies that like depend on a language like Go, the higher its overall value becomes.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's pretty fascinating how a language's like strengths can actually translate into real world value. What other like insights stood out to you from the data?
Well, we also saw that the JavaScript dominates in the built with data,
Hmm.
which, focuses on like the software used for like websites and stuff.
Yeah.
And this like aligns perfectly with JavaScript's role as like the main language for web development.
Yeah.
It's what makes websites interactive and dynamic, right?
Right.
So it's no surprise that its demand side value is so high in that like specific context.
Yeah, that tracks with what I know about JavaScript. It's basically the language of the web. But what about Python? It's incredibly popular these days. I mean, like you hear about it like everywhere.
You're right, you're right. Python is widely used. However, in the context of this analysis, its value turned out to be surprisingly low.
Now that is interesting. Could this mean that like the census and built with data are kind of showing us two different sides of the same coin? Like are different languages being used for different purposes? Maybe some are more focused on like those public facing applications, like the websites and stuff, and then others are more for like the internal software needs of businesses.
You've hit the nail on the head there. It seems like there's a real difference between the software that's used publicly and then the software that's used behind the scenes to like power business operations.
Yeah.
And that difference is like reflected in the value we assign to the languages that are used to create them. I think we stumbled onto something pretty important here.
This is really making me think about the complexity of
Yep.
this open source world. It's not just like this one big thing. It's like a diverse ecosystem, like all these different languages serving different purposes. I'm really curious to see how this like plays out across different industries.
And that's exactly where we're going next. The Built with Data, it gives us a fascinating look into how different sectors of the economy benefit from open source software.
All right, let's see which industries are like winning big from this whole free software revolution.
Let's do it.
Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah, welcome back. So we've been talking about this whole hidden value of open source software. Those free lines of code that are powering so much of the digital world around us. Everything from the apps on our phones to like all the websites we visit.
And it's been like eye-opening, right, to see just how much companies are actually saving, like thanks to open source. We're talking like trillions of dollars here.
Trillions, yeah.
But now I'm kind of wondering, like, how do we even begin to measure the value of something that's essentially free? It almost feels like some kind of economic paradox.
You're right. It's a really great question, and it gets to the heart of why open source is so unique. Like traditional economic models, they often struggle to capture its true value. Think about it. We usually figure out value by looking at price, right? Like you multiply that by the quantity sold.
Right, right. It's like the basic supply and demand stuff we all learned in like high school.
Exactly, yeah. But with open source, the price is usually zero because the code is like freely available. Like anyone can get it.
And the quantity is kind of hard to pin down, right? Because we don't have any central authority tracking like downloads or usage. It's almost like trying to measure the value of the air we breathe. We all benefit, but there's no price tag on it.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. So how did the researchers behind the Census the Second and the Built with dataset, how did they actually manage to put a number on this seemingly intangible value?
I'm all ears. Tell me what they did.
Well, they took this pretty clever approach, right? They focused on labor replacement value. So instead of trying to like directly measure the value of the software itself, they asked themselves, okay, what if open source software just didn't exist? Like what would it cost companies to hire all these developers to just recreate everything from scratch?
So it's about calculating the cost of replacing all those lines of code if we had to like literally start from zero.
Precisely. And as we saw earlier, that initial cost of rewriting the most widely used open source software just once, it's already in the billions of dollars.
Yeah, which is crazy in itself, but then they took it even further, right? They calculated the cost if every company had to like do their own rewrite.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's where we get those crazy astronomical figures like trillions of dollars in potential costs. It's a really powerful way to just like highlight how much open source software contributes to the global economy. It's almost like this invisible foundation that's supporting everything we do online.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective. Okay, now I have another like burning question. If companies are saving so much money thanks to open source, shouldn't they like be doing more to actually support its development?
You're absolutely right. Like the sustainability of the whole open source ecosystem,
Hmm.
it's a huge issue, and we see that concern reflected in the data.
Yeah.
Remember, only 5% of developers are contributing the vast majority of the value.
Yeah, that's both incredible and like kind of worrying at the same time. Like,
Mhm.
what happens if those super contributors like burn out or move on to other things?
Yeah, it's a totally valid concern. We need to like find ways to encourage more people to get involved and make sure that those who are already contributing feel supported.
So how do we actually address that? Like what can companies, governments, even individuals, like what can they do to help sustain open source?
Well, I think one really important step is just raising awareness. A lot of people outside of the tech world, they just have no idea what open source software is or how much we actually depend on it.
So we need more like open source evangelists out there spreading the word.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to like educate policymakers, business leaders, and just the public like about the critical role that open source plays in all of our digital lives. But awareness is just the first step, right? We also need to create incentives for companies to actually contribute back to the ecosystem.
Because right now it seems like a lot of companies are kind of happy to just benefit from this free software without giving much back, right? It's almost like enjoying a public park but never volunteering to like help clean up or plant new trees.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy. It's a classic example of the free rider problem. But but there are ways to encourage more like reciprocal contributions. For example, we can simplify the whole process of contributing to open source projects, right?
Okay.
Like clear guidelines, mentorship opportunities, those kinds of things can make it a lot easier for companies to get involved, even if they've like never done it before.
So it's about like removing those barriers and making participation more accessible. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Another approach is to like recognize and reward the companies that are already actively supporting open source.
Mm.
Like industry awards, public recognition, maybe even some tax incentives. It's about creating a culture where contributing to open source is seen as a really good thing.
So it's kind of a carrot and stick approach. Make it easier to participate and then like highlight those who are doing a great job.
Precisely. Yeah. We need both that awareness and concrete actions to make sure that open source is healthy in the long run.
All right, so we've got awareness, we've got incentives. What other pieces of this puzzle are we missing?
Well, funding is another major challenge. Like open source development, it often relies super heavily on volunteers, right?
Mm.
Which is admirable, but not always sustainable.
Especially for those like core contributors, the ones who are dedicating like countless hours to these projects. They really deserve to be compensated for their work.
I completely agree. We need to explore new funding models,
Mm.
ones that can provide more financial support to developers and maintainers. There are some promising things emerging, like grants, donations, even venture capital investments, specifically targeted at open source.
So it's about like finding ways to inject more resources into the ecosystem so developers can like focus on what they do best, which is creating this incredible software that benefits all of us.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
and and finally, we need to like foster a culture of collaboration and knowledge sharing within the open source community itself.
Because even though the open source world is kind of built on collaboration, there's always room for improvement, right?
Absolutely. We need to encourage mentorship, knowledge transfer, cross-project collaboration. This will ensure that the community stays vibrant, right?
Yeah.
And that knowledge is passed down to the next generation of developers.
It's like building a strong foundation for the future of open source, kind of like tending a garden. You need the right soil, sunlight, and nutrients to help it thrive.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And if we can nurture this open source garden, it's going to continue to produce amazing things for years to come. But now I'm kind of curious to get your perspective. All this talk about value and sustainability, one question keeps popping into my head. If open source software is free to use, why would any company ever consider paying for it?
That's a great question. It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Like why pay for something you can get for free?
Exactly. But there are actually several reasons why a company might choose to pay for open source software, even
Right.
though it's technically available for free.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay, well, first and foremost, there's the issue of support. Open source software, it often has like really strong community support forums and documentation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But some companies might prefer to have a dedicated team that they can turn to for help. With troubleshooting, customization, integration, all that stuff. It's about having that peace of mind, right? Like
Yeah.
knowing that someone has your back if something goes wrong.
So it's like having a warranty for your software.
Right.
That makes perfect sense, especially if a company's like mission critical operations rely heavily on that open source software.
Exactly. Exactly. Another important factor is security. Open source software is generally very secure, right?
Mm.
Because of like the scrutiny of a large community of developers,
Yeah.
but vulnerabilities can still happen.
Right.
And for some companies, especially those in highly regulated industries like healthcare or finance, the risk of a security breach is just too big to ignore.
So they're willing to pay for that extra layer of secure like vulnerability patching and security audits and things like that just to try and mitigate those potential risks.
Precisely. Yeah, it's about balancing the cost savings of using the free software with the potential costs of like a security incident. And finally, some companies might choose to pay for open source software as a way to contribute to its development.
Yeah.
Make sure that it keeps going in the long term.
So it's like a way of investing in the future of the software that they're using, right?
Hmm.
Like almost like a strategic bet on its continued success.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a way to support the community, right? Contribute to innovation and then potentially gain like some influence over the direction of the project itself. So it's kind of a win-win situation for everyone involved.
It's pretty amazing to see how open source has evolved from like this niche community of passionate developers, right, into this global phenomenon. I mean, it has some serious economic implications.
It really is. It's a remarkable story.
Mhm.
And as more and more people rely on open source software, those strategic considerations that you mentioned, they're probably going to become even more important.
It feels like we're kind of at a crossroads. Open source has revolutionized the way we build and use technology, but now we need to figure out how to sustain this vital ecosystem for the long run.
I couldn't agree more. It's a huge challenge, but I'm optimistic that we can find creative solutions, and that's actually a conversation that we're going to continue to explore in our next segment.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us.
So we've been talking about this whole idea of like the hidden value of open source software, right? All those free lines of code that are like quietly powering so much of our digital world.
And we've seen that this free software actually represents like trillions and trillions of dollars in value to the global economy.
Trillions. It's crazy, but the big question now is like, how do we make sure this whole ecosystem, this vital ecosystem, how do we make sure it keeps going strong, into the future? That's what we're trying to figure out now.
Exactly. We've got to find ways to support open source software,
Mm.
and make sure that it keeps developing and evolving. Where do we even start?
Well, you were talking about like awareness and incentives
Yeah.
earlier. Right?
Mhm.
Those seem like pretty good places to start.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, raising awareness about open source software, that's huge. A lot of people, especially those outside the tech world, they have like no clue what it is or how much we all depend on it every single day.
So we need to get the word out, educate policymakers, business leaders, even just the general public. It's almost like we're revealing this like hidden superpower that's been working behind the scenes this whole time.
Exactly, yeah. It's been there all along, but just raising awareness, that's not enough on its own,
Mm.
right? We need to actually create incentives for companies to give back to the ecosystem.
Because right now it kind of feels like there's a bit of a free rider problem happening, right? Like companies are happy to benefit from this free software, but they're not necessarily doing a whole lot to give back in return. It's almost like, going to a public park, enjoying all the trees and the fresh air, but never like bothering to volunteer to clean up or plant new trees.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's a classic example of that free rider problem we see in economics. But there are ways to kind of nudge things in the right direction,
Mm.
right? Like encourage more of those reciprocal contributions. One way is to make it easier for companies to actually contribute to open source projects.
Okay. Yeah.
Like think about, clear guidelines, mentorship opportunities, things like that. They can make it less intimidating for companies to get involved,
Mhm.
especially if they've like never done anything like this before.
So it's like we're lowering the bar, right? Making participation more accessible and less scary.
Exactly. Exactly. And we can also, we can go the other way too. We can actually recognize and reward the companies that are already stepping up and actively supporting open source. Like think about things like industry awards, public recognition, even tax
The
incentives.
gold star system, right? For all the good open source citizens out there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Shine a spotlight on the companies that are doing great work, right? It can inspire others to follow their lead.
So it's a little bit of a carrot and stick approach.
Right.
Make it easy to participate and then highlight those who are really going above and beyond.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need both. We need the awareness and the concrete actions to make sure that open source is going to be healthy in the long run.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so we've talked about awareness, we've talked about incentives. What other pieces are we missing here? What else do we need to think about?
Well, funding is a huge one. Open source development, it also relies heavily on volunteers,
Yeah.
right? People just contributing their time and energy because they believe in the project,
Right.
which is amazing. It's really admirable.
Yeah.
But it's not always sustainable.
Yeah, especially for those core contributors, the ones who are dedicating like countless hours to these projects. Those folks, they deserve to be compensated for their hard work, for their expertise.
I totally agree. We need to find some new ways to fund open source, right? Some new models that can provide like more financial stability to the developers, the maintainers, and there are some promising things starting to pop up. Like grants, donations, even venture capital specifically for open source projects.
Yeah. So it's about finding ways to bring more resources into the ecosystem, right? Give those developers the support they need to keep doing what they do best, which is, creating this incredible software that benefits all of us.
Exactly, yeah. And then finally, we also need to think about the culture within the open source community itself. Like we need to make sure it's a place where collaboration and knowledge sharing are really encouraged.
Because even though the open source world is already like pretty collaborative, there's always room for improvement.
Oh, absolutely. We need to encourage mentorship, knowledge transfer, and that kind of cross-project collaboration. I mean, that's what's going to keep the community vibrant, right? Make sure that knowledge gets passed on to the next generation of developers.
It's like we're building a strong foundation for the future of open source, right? Like tending a garden. You need the right soil, the right sunlight, the right nutrients to help it thrive.
Yeah, I like that. It's all about nurturing that open source garden so it can keep bearing fruit for years and years to come.
So to wrap things up, what does this all mean for you, our listener out there? Here's a final thought to kind of chew on. If you're using open source software, and chances are you are, think about how you can give back to the community.
Even small contributions, they can make a huge difference, whether it's, reporting a bug, improving some documentation, or even just donating to a project that you really love. Every little bit helps.
It's this incredible resource we all depend on, but it really thrives on shared responsibility and participation.
So go out there, explore the world of open source, find a project that speaks to you and get involved. You might be surprised by how rewarding it can be.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden value of open source software.
Yeah, thanks for listening.